Hey there, and welcome to Crazy Pepper, the channel where drama sizzles and revenge burns hotter than ever. If you love jaw dropping twists, bold characters, and stories that keep you guessing till the end, you're in the right place. Subscribe and dive into gripping tales of betrayal, karma, and ultimate payback. Get ready for unforgettable moments and satisfying endings, only on Crazy Pepper. Hit that bell and let the drama begin. The phone screamed at 3 in the morning, cutting through the suburban silence like a knife through butter. I knew before I even looked at the caller ID that this wasn't going to be good news. Nobody calls at 3 a.m. with lottery winnings or birthday wishes. Jack, my father's voice carried that familiar CIA edge, the one that used to make foreign diplomats wet themselves back in the day. Are you home? Dad, it's 3 in the morning. Of course I'm home. Lock every door, now. Take your son to the guest room. Don't let your wife know I called. The line went dead. I sat there in my boxers, staring at the phone like it might explain itself. My father, retired CIA operative turned paranoid hermit, hadn't called me in 6 months. The last time he'd given me orders like that, I'd ended up spending 2 days in a safe house while he sorted out some old business with people who had very creative ideas about revenge. But this felt different. This felt personal. I padded down the hallway, checking locks I'd already checked before bed. The front door, the back door, the sliding glass door to the deck. All secure. But as I reached for the deadbolt on the front door, I saw headlights creeping up our driveway with the lights off. My wife's BMW slid to a stop behind my Honda, and I watched through the peephole as Susan climbed out. She moved like someone trying not to wake the neighbors, which would have been considerate if it weren't 3:15 in the morning, and she wasn't supposed to be coming home until tomorrow from her business conference in Baltimore. She had something in her hands, something long and dark. My blood turned to ice water when I realized what it was, my rifle. The Remington 870 I kept locked in the tool safe in my home office. The tool safe that required 2 keys and a combination that only Susan and I knew. I backed away from the door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. 14 years of marriage, and I thought I knew this woman. I thought I knew what she was capable of. I was wrong. The sound of a key in the front door lock made me move. I sprinted upstairs, taking the steps 3 at a time, and burst into Ethan's room. My 14-year-old son was dead to the world, earbuds in, probably listening to some podcast about conspiracy theories or true crime. Kid had my suspicious nature, but his mother's timing. Ethan, I shook his shoulder. Ethan, wake up. He pulled out one earbud and squinted at me in the darkness. Dad, what's wrong? We need to go to the guest room. Right now. Don't ask questions. Something in my voice must have convinced him because he rolled out of bed without argument. We made it to the guest room just as I heard the front door open downstairs. I locked the guest room door and pushed the dresser in front of it. Ethan watched me with wide eyes, suddenly looking much younger than 14. Dad, you're scaring me. Stay quiet, I whispered. Whatever happens, don't open this door. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate. The footsteps of someone who knew exactly where they were going. My home office was directly below the guest room. I heard the door open, heard drawers being pulled out, papers rustling. She was looking for something. Something important enough to break into her own house at 3 in the morning with a rifle. Then I heard voices. Susan's voice and another voice I recognized, but couldn't place. A man's voice, low and urgent. Are you sure he keeps the files here? I'm sure. Jack's paranoid about digital storage. Everything important is in hard copy. Files. What files? I ran a small cybersecurity consulting business out of my home office. Most of my work was routine corporate stuff, nothing that would warrant a midnight break-in by my own wife, unless... The pieces started falling into place like dominoes in my head. The late nights Susan had been working, the business conferences that seemed to happen every other weekend. The way she'd been asking casual questions about my clients, my work, my security protocols. The way she'd been looking at me lately, like I was something she needed to step around rather than someone she'd promised to love and honor. I can't find them. Susan's voice carried up through the floor, frustrated and sharp. He must have moved them. Check his computer. It's encrypted. I tried before. She'd tried before. How long had this been going on? A crash from downstairs made Ethan jump. Something heavy hitting the floor. My desk chair, probably. They were tearing my office apart. "We need to go." The man's voice again, more urgent now. "You said he'd be asleep until morning." "He should be. I put enough Ambien in his coffee to knock out a horse." My coffee. The coffee she'd brought me before bed, smiling that sweet smile I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. The coffee that had tasted slightly bitter, but I'd assumed she'd used a different brand. She'd sedated me. My own wife had sedated me and broken into my office with her boyfriend, because that's what this had to be, wasn't it? Susan had a boyfriend, and they were looking for something in my files, something worth committing multiple felonies for. But what? The answer hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. The Morrison case. 6 months ago, I'd done security consulting for a real estate development company. Standard stuff mostly, firewalls, encrypted communications, secure file storage. But I'd also discovered some irregularities in their accounting software. Nothing I could prove, but enough to make me keep copies of everything. Just in case. The development company that had been all over the local news lately for a massive fraud investigation. The development company that had bilked investors out of $12 million. The development company where Susan's business partner, Mike, worked. Another crash from downstairs, followed by the sound of my filing cabinet drawers being yanked open. They were getting desperate. "Found them!" Susan's voice, triumphant. "The Morrison files, all of them. Burn them. Here in the house? We don't have a choice. If these files get to the FBI, we're all going to prison." Prison? My wife was facing prison time, and instead of coming to me for help, she decided to sedate me and steal evidence from my office. Evidence that could probably put a lot of people away for a very long time, including her. The smell of smoke started drifting up through the floorboards. They were actually doing it. They were burning down my office, in my house, with me and my son upstairs. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but before I could hit send, the guest room door exploded inward. The dresser I'd pushed against it went flying, and Susan stood in the doorway with my rifle pointed at my chest. She looked different in the dim light from the hallway. Harder, like the woman I'd married had been replaced by someone who just happened to share her face. "Hang up the phone, Jack." Behind her, I could see a man I recognized from Susan's office Christmas parties. Mike Patterson, real estate developer, married father of 2, and apparently my wife's partner in more ways than one. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was small and scared. "What's going on?" Susan's eyes flicked to our son, and for just a moment, I saw a flash of the woman I'd married. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Your father has some files that belong to us," she said, her voice steady. "We're just here to collect them." "By burning down the house?" I kept my voice calm, but my hands were shaking. "With your own son inside? The fire's contained to your office." "We're not monsters, Jack." "No, just thieves and arsonists." Mike stepped forward, and I got my first good look at him. Tall, handsome in a generic way, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. The kind of man who'd never had to work for anything in his life, who thought rules were suggestions and consequences were for other people. "Give us the backup files, Jack, and we'll be gone. No one has to get hurt." "What backup files?" Susan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Don't play dumb. I know how you work. You keep copies of everything, stored somewhere safe. Insurance, you call it." She was right, of course. I did keep copies, but not for the reasons she thought. "I don't know what you're talking about." The rifle barrel swung toward Ethan, and my world narrowed to that single point of focus. Everything else, the smoke, the fear, the betrayal, disappeared. There was only my son and the weapon pointed at him. "Don't." My voice came out as a growl. "Don't even think about it. Then give us what we want." I looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Someone who would threaten her own child to cover up her crimes. Someone who would sedate her husband and burn down their home to destroy evidence. Someone who had never really loved me at all. "The files are in a safety deposit box," I said. "First National Bank, downtown, box 247. It was a lie, but a convincing one. The real copies were hidden in a place they'd never think to look. Susan smiled, and it was like watching a shark bare its teeth. "Thank you. That wasn't so hard, was it?" She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Jack, if you call the police, if you try to follow us, if you do anything other than put out that fire and pretend this never happened, well, let's just say that safety deposit box isn't the only thing I know about." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Then they were gone, leaving me and Ethan alone in the guest room with the smell of burning paper and the sound of our lives falling apart. I held my son while sirens wailed in the distance, and I made myself a promise. Susan thought she'd won. She thought she'd destroyed the evidence and silenced the only witness who could bring her down. She was wrong on both counts. The fire department left at dawn after confirming what I already knew. The fire had been contained to my home office, and it had been deliberately set. The insurance investigator would be by later in the week, followed by the police arson detective. I'd have to tell them something, but I wasn't sure what yet. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, picking at a bowl of cereal and staring at the blackened doorway that used to lead to my office. He hadn't said much since the firefighters arrived, just answered their questions with quiet monosyllables and stayed close to me. "Dad?" His voice was smaller than it should have been for a kid his size. "Are you and Mom getting divorced?" I poured myself a cup of coffee, checking it carefully for any unusual taste or smell, and sat down across from him. "I think that's a pretty safe assumption, buddy. Because of what she did last night? Because of a lot of things. Last night was just the final straw." He nodded like that made sense, which broke my heart a little. No 14-year-old should have to be that understanding about his parents' marriage falling apart. "Where is she now?" Good question. Susan's BMW was gone from the driveway, along with most of her clothes from our bedroom closet. She'd packed and left while the fire department was still hosing down my office, like she'd planned it that way. Maybe she had. "I don't know," I told Ethan. "But I'm sure she's safe." My phone buzzed with a text message. Susan's number. "Sorry about last night. We need to talk. Meet me at Starbucks on 5th Street at 10 a.m. Come alone." I showed the message to Ethan, who read it with the same expression he got when he was working through a particularly difficult math problem. "Are you going to go?" "Yeah, I think I have to." "Can I come with you?" "She said come alone." She also said she wasn't a monster right before she pointed a tool at me. Fair point. But I needed to hear what Susan had to say, and I needed to say a few things to her myself. Things that were better said without my son present. "Stay with Mrs. Henderson next door. I'll be back in an hour." The Starbucks on 5th Street was one of those generic corporate locations that looked exactly like every other Starbucks in America. Susan had chosen a table in the back corner away from the morning rush crowd. She looked tired, older somehow, like the events of the previous night had aged her 5 years. She was wearing sunglasses indoors, which was either a fashion choice or an attempt to hide evidence of a sleepless night. Knowing Susan, it could have been either. "You look like hell," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Thanks. You're not exactly glowing yourself." I studied her face, looking for some trace of the woman I'd married. She was still beautiful. Susan had always been beautiful, but there was something different about her now. Something cold and calculating that I'd either never noticed or she'd gotten very good at hiding. "So," I said, "how long?" "How long what?" "How long have you been sleeping with Mike Patterson? How long have you been planning to rob me? How long have you been putting on this act of being my loving wife while you plotted to destroy my life?" She took off the sunglasses, and I could see that I'd been right about the sleepless night. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy with dark circles that makeup couldn't quite hide. "It's not what you think." "Really? Because what I think is that you've been having an affair with a married man who's under federal investigation for fraud, and last night you broke into my office to steal evidence that could send both of you to prison. Please tell me how wrong I am." Susan looked around the coffee shop, making sure no one was listening. "Keep your voice down. Or what, you'll burn down the Starbucks? That was an accident. The fire got out of control. You deliberately set fire to papers in my office. The only accident was that you didn't burn down the whole house with your son inside." For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw something that might have been guilt, but it was gone so quickly I couldn't be sure. "I would never hurt Ethan." "You pointed a rifle at him." "I pointed it near him." "There's a difference. Not from where I was sitting." She leaned forward, and I caught a whiff of expensive perfume mixed with smoke and desperation. "Jack, you have to understand. We didn't have a choice. If those files had gotten to the FBI, then maybe you shouldn't have committed the crimes in the first place. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The Morrison project was legitimate. We had investors, permits, everything was legal. But then the economy tanked and the investors started pulling out, and we were left holding $12 million in debt with no way to pay it back. So you decided to steal it instead. We decided to get creative with the accounting, just temporarily until we could find new investors and get the project back on track. Creative accounting. Is that what they're calling embezzlement these days?" Susan's jaw tightened. You don't understand what it's like to have that kind of pressure. To have people depending on you, trusting you with their money, and knowing that one wrong move could destroy everything. You're right, I don't understand, because when I'm under pressure, I don't sedate my husband and burn down his office. We needed those files, Jack. They contain evidence that could implicate a lot of innocent people. Innocent people like Mike Patterson? Mike made some mistakes, but he's not the villain you think he is. He's a good man who got in over his head. I laughed, and it came out bitter and harsh. A good man. Right. Good men don't sleep with other people's wives. Good men don't steal $12 million from investors. Good men don't break into houses at 3 in the morning with rifles. You don't know him like I do. And apparently I don't know you like I thought I did either. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 20 years of marriage collapsing between us. I tried to remember when things had started going wrong, when Susan had stopped being my partner and started being my enemy. But I couldn't pinpoint a specific moment. It had been gradual, like watching someone drown in slow motion. What happens now? I asked. Now we get divorced, quietly, amicably. You don't press charges for last night, you don't contact the FBI about the Morrison files, and I don't make things difficult for you in the custody hearing. You're threatening me? I'm offering you a deal. You walk away from this, and everyone gets what they want. You get your freedom, I get mine, and Ethan doesn't have to watch his mother go to prison. And Mike gets away with stealing $12 million. Mike is none of your concern anymore. I studied her face, looking for any sign of the woman who used to laugh at my jokes and fall asleep in my arms. She was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger who spoke about our marriage like it was a business transaction. What if I say no? Susan smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Then things get complicated. You see, Jack, you're not the only one who keeps insurance files. I've been documenting your behavior for months. Your drinking, your anger issues, your obsession with conspiracy theories. I have photos of bruises, recordings of arguments, testimony from friends about your increasingly erratic behavior. The coffee in my mouth turned to ash. You're going to frame me for domestic misuse. I'm going to tell the truth about what it's been like living with you, how you've become paranoid and controlling, how you've been monitoring my phone calls and following me around town, how you threatened me and Mike last night when you found out about our relationship. Our relationship, is that what you're calling it? What would you call it? Infidelity, fraud, conspiracy. Take your pick. Susan put her sunglasses back on and stood up. Think about my offer, Jack. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, I file for divorce and request a restraining order. And trust me, you don't want to fight me in court. I'm very good at telling stories that juries believe. She walked away, leaving me alone at the table with a cold cup of coffee and the wreckage of my life. Around me, the morning rush continued like nothing had happened. People ordered lattes and checked their phones and went about their normal lives, oblivious to the fact that my world had just ended. I sat there for a long time, trying to figure out how I'd gotten to this point. How the woman I'd loved for 20 years had become someone I didn't recognize. How the life I'd built had crumbled so completely in the space of a single night. But mostly, I tried to figure out what I was going to do next. Because Susan had made one crucial mistake in her calculations. She assumed I would take her deal, that I would walk away quietly and let her and Mike disappear into their new life together. She was wrong. I'd spent 15 years in the CIA before I became a cybersecurity consultant. I'd tracked down terrorists, exposed double agents, and brought down criminal organizations that thought they were untouchable. Susan and Mike had no idea what they'd just started. But they were about to find out. The gym smelled like sweat, disinfectant, and broken dreams. The pit wasn't the kind of place you went to look good in yoga pants and take selfies for Instagram. It was the kind of place you went to hit things until your knuckles bled and your problems seemed manageable. I'd been coming here for 3 years, ever since my doctor told me I needed to find a healthier way to deal with stress than drinking bourbon and staying up all night, researching conspiracy theories on the internet. The boxing had helped, even if it hadn't completely cured my paranoid tendencies. Right now, those paranoid tendencies were looking pretty justified. You look like someone ran over your dog, said Tommy Nguyen, unwrapping his hands after a session with the heavy bag. Tommy was a retired Marine who'd done 3 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to run a small construction business. He was also one of the few people I'd met who understood what it was like to have your whole world turned upside down in the space of a single night. Worse, I said, lacing up my gloves. Someone ran over my marriage. Susan? Susan and her boyfriend. And about $12 million in stolen money. Tommy whistled low. That's a hell of a story. You want to talk about it or you want to beat the shit out of something? Both. I told him the whole story while I worked the heavy bag, throwing combinations that got progressively more violent as I got to the part about Susan pointing a rifle at Ethan. By the time I finished, my knuckles were raw, and Tommy was looking at me like I'd grown a second head. Jesus, Jack, that's some serious criminal behavior. You called the cops, right? And tell them what? That my wife broke into my office to steal evidence of her boyfriend's embezzlement scheme? With what proof? The files are gone, burned to ash. It's my word against theirs, and Susan's already planning to paint me as an abusive, paranoid drunk. Are you abusive, I mean? I stopped hitting the bag and looked at him. What do you think? I think you're a lot of things, but abusive isn't one of them. Paranoid, maybe. But given what just happened, that seems pretty reasonable. Try explaining that to a divorce judge. Tommy was quiet for a moment, thinking. So what are you going to do? I'm going to destroy them. Come again? Susan thinks she's won. She thinks she's covered all her bases, eliminated all the evidence, neutralized the only witness who could bring her down. She's wrong. You still have copies of the files? Better than that, I have something she doesn't know about. I pulled out my phone and showed Tommy a photo I'd taken 6 months ago during my security assessment of the Morrison project. It showed Mike Patterson and 2 other men standing in front of a construction site, shaking hands over what appeared to be a briefcase full of cash. I took this as part of my standard documentation process, I explained. Routine surveillance to identify potential security vulnerabilities. I had no idea what I was looking at until last night. Tommy studied the photo. What am I looking at? Mike Patterson taking a bribe from Vincent Caruso. Who's Vincent Caruso? Mob-connected contractor who's been under FBI surveillance for the past 2 years. If Mike was taking money from Caruso, then the Morrison project wasn't just embezzlement. It was money laundering. Tommy's eyes widened. That's a federal crime. That's a federal crime with a 20-year sentence. And if Susan knew about it, which she had to, given how deep she was in the project, then she's looking at conspiracy charges on top of everything else. So you've got them. I've got them. The question is what to do with it. Before Tommy could answer, my phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Murphy's Bar, 8 p.m. Come alone. Lisa Patterson. Lisa Patterson, Mike's wife. The woman whose husband had been sleeping with my wife for God knows how long. I showed the message to Tommy, who read it with a frown. Could be a trap, he said. Could be, or it could be exactly what I need. What do you mean? Think about it. Lisa Patterson's husband is having an affair and stealing money. She's probably looking at losing everything in the divorce. Her house, her lifestyle, her social standing. And if Mike goes to prison for money laundering, she gets nothing. So she might be looking for a little revenge of her own. Murphy's Bar was the kind of place where people went to drink away their problems and pretend they were someone else. Dark, smoky, with a bartender who'd seen everything and judged nothing. I'd been there a few times over the years, usually after particularly bad days at work. Tonight felt like it qualified. Lisa Patterson was sitting in a booth in the back corner, nursing what looked like a whiskey sour and staring at her phone. She was a small woman, probably in her late 30s, with blonde hair and the kind of nervous energy that suggested she'd been drinking for a while. Mrs. Patterson? She looked up, and I could see that her eyes were red from crying. Jack Morrison, I presume? Thank you for coming. I slid into the booth across from her. Your message said you wanted to talk. I wanted to apologize. For what? For what my husband did to your family. For what he's been doing to our families. She took a sip of her drink and grimaced. I found out about the affair 3 weeks ago. Mike's not very good at covering his tracks. Receipts for hotel rooms, charges for expensive dinners, phone calls at all hours of the night. I confronted him about it. And he told me he was leaving me for Susan. I'm sorry. Are you? Because you don't look sorry. You look angry. She was right. I was angry, furious, actually, but not at her. I'm angry at the situation. I'm angry at your husband for destroying 2 families. I'm angry at my wife for lying to me for months. But I'm not angry at you. Lisa nodded and took another sip of her drink. Mike thinks he's so smart. He thinks he's got it all figured out. New wife, new life, new start. He has no idea what's coming. What do you mean? I mean, I've been married to him for 15 years. I know where the bodies are buried, literally in some cases. She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope, which she slid across the table to me. What's this? Insurance, financial records, bank statements, correspondence with Vincent Caruso, photos of cash transactions. Everything you need to prove that Mike wasn't just embezzling money from the Morrison project, he was laundering money for the mob. I opened the envelope and flipped through the contents. It was a prosecutor's dream. Detailed financial records, showing payments from shell companies connected to Caruso, photographs of Mike meeting with known criminals, even recordings of phone conversations where Mike discussed cleaning money through the construction project. Why are you giving me this? Because Mike thinks he can just walk away from 15 years of marriage with no consequences. He thinks he can take everything we built together and give it to your wife. He's wrong. What do you want in return? Lisa smiled, and for the first time since I'd sat down, she looked genuinely happy. I want you to destroy him. I want you to take everything he has and everything he thinks he's going to have with Susan. I want him to lose his business, his freedom, and his future. I want him to spend the next 20 years in a federal prison, wondering how it all went wrong. And Susan? Susan made her choice. She chose to destroy your family to be with my husband. Now she gets to live with the consequences. I looked at the envelope again, thinking about what Lisa was offering me. Complete revenge against the people who had destroyed my life. Justice for the crimes they'd committed. Protection for my son. All I had to do was say yes. There is one more thing, Lisa said. Mike doesn't know I have these files. He thinks they were destroyed in a fire at his office last month. He has no idea that I made copies of everything before I called the fire department. You burned down his office? I burned down his office, with 15 years of financial records inside. Mike thinks all the evidence of his crimes went up in smoke. He has no idea that I've been building a case against him for months. I stared at her, seeing Lisa Patterson in a completely new light. She wasn't just a scorned wife looking for revenge. She was a woman who had been systematically documenting her husband's crimes, preparing for exactly this moment. You've been planning this for a while. Ever since I found out about the affair, I knew Mike would eventually try to leave me for someone else. I just wanted to make sure he couldn't take everything with him when he did. What about Susan? How much does she know about Mike's business dealings? Everything. She's been helping him launder money through fake real estate transactions for the past year. She's not just his mistress. She's his partner in crime. The pieces were falling into place. Susan hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been actively participating in a criminal conspiracy, using her real estate connections to help Mike clean dirty money through property transactions. I need to think about this, I said. Don't think too long. Mike and Susan are planning to disappear next week. They've got new identities, offshore bank accounts, the whole thing. If you're going to stop them, it has to be soon. Lisa stood up and dropped a 20 on the table. My number's in the envelope. Call me when you're ready to burn their world down. She walked away, leaving me alone with the envelope and the biggest decision of my life. I could take Lisa's evidence to the FBI and watch Susan and Mike go to prison for the next 20 years. I could get my revenge, protect my son, and make sure that justice was served. Or I could take Susan's deal, walk away quietly, and spend the rest of my life knowing that the people who destroyed my family were living happily ever after with stolen money. It wasn't really a choice at all. I pulled out my phone and dialed Lisa's number. Lisa, it's Jack. Let's burn it all down. The FBI field office in downtown DC looked exactly like what it was. A fortress designed to keep secrets in and enemies out. I'd been here before, back in my CIA days, but never as a civilian with a manila envelope full of evidence and a burning desire for revenge. Special Agent Sarah Chen met me in the lobby. A serious woman in her 40s with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd seen everything and been surprised by nothing. She'd been the lead investigator on the Morrison case for 6 months, ever since the first investor complaints had started rolling in. Mr. Morrison, she said, shaking my hand, thank you for coming in. I understand you have some information about the Morrison Development Project. I have more than information. I have proof. We took the elevator to the 15th floor, where Chen led me to a small conference room with a table, 4 chairs, and a recording device. Standard FBI interview setup, designed to make witnesses feel comfortable while ensuring that everything they said was documented for potential use in court. Before we begin, Chen said, I need to make sure you understand that anything you tell me today could be used in a federal prosecution. Are you prepared for that? Agent Chen, my wife and her boyfriend broke into my house, stole evidence from my office, and burned it to cover up their crimes. They threatened my son with a rifle. I'm not just prepared for a federal prosecution. I'm counting on it. Chen smiled for the first time since I'd met her. In that case, let's see what you've got. I opened Lisa's envelope and spread the contents across the table. Financial records, photographs, bank statements, recorded phone conversations. 6 months of meticulous documentation that painted a clear picture of a criminal conspiracy involving money laundering, embezzlement, and fraud. Chen studied the documents with the focused attention of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this kind of break in her case. Where did you get these? Lisa Patterson, Mike's wife. She's been documenting his criminal activities for months. And she's willing to testify? She's willing to do whatever it takes to see her husband go to prison. Chen picked up one of the photographs, which showed Mike Patterson handing a briefcase to Vincent Caruso in what appeared to be a parking garage. When was this taken? 6 months ago. I took it as part of a security assessment I was doing for the Morrison project. I had no idea what I was looking at until my wife broke into my office to steal my files. Your wife was involved in the conspiracy? Up to her neck. She's been helping Mike launder money through fake real estate transactions. She's not just his mistress, she's his business partner. Chen made notes on a legal pad while I walked her through everything I knew about Susan and Mike's relationship, their criminal activities, and their plan to disappear with the stolen money. Do you know where they are now? Susan's staying at the Marriott downtown. Mike's at his office, pretending everything is normal. They think they've destroyed all the evidence and eliminated the only witness who could hurt them. But they were wrong. They were very wrong. Chen gathered up the documents and photos, handling them like they were made of gold, which, from a prosecutor's perspective, they probably were. Mr. Morrison, this is excellent work. With this evidence and Mrs. Patterson's testimony, we can build a solid case for money laundering, embezzlement, conspiracy, and fraud. We're looking at 20-year sentences for both of them. What happens now? Now, we move fast. If they're planning to run, we need to arrest them before they can disappear. Can you get them both in the same place at the same time? I thought about it. Susan and Mike were cautious, but they were also arrogant. They thought they'd won, that they'd outsmarted everyone and gotten away with the perfect crime. That arrogance was going to be their downfall. I can do better than that, I said. I can get them to confess on camera. How? Leave that to me. Just make sure you're ready to move when I give you the signal. Chen handed me her business card with her cell phone number written on the back. Call me the moment you have them. We'll be ready. I left the FBI building with a spring in my step for the first time in days. Susan and Mike thought they'd destroyed my life, but they'd actually given me something I'd never had before, a clear sense of purpose. For the past 3 years, ever since I'd left the CIA, I'd been drifting. Going through the motions of a normal life, but never really feeling like I belonged in the suburban world of PTA meetings and neighborhood barbecues. Now I remembered who I used to be, what I used to be good at. I was going to enjoy this. My phone buzzed with a text message from Susan. Have you thought about my offer? Time's running out. I smiled and typed back, let's meet tonight. Murphy's Bar, 9 p.m. We need to talk. Her response came back almost immediately. Fine, but this is your last chance, Jack. Don't blow it. Oh, I wasn't going to blow it. But Susan was about to find out that she'd seriously underestimated the man she'd been married to for 20 years. I had 6 hours to set up the perfect trap. 6 hours to arrange the downfall of the two people who destroyed my family. It was going to be the best 6 hours of my life. Murphy's Bar was crowded for a Tuesday night, which was perfect for my purposes. Lots of witnesses, lots of background noise, and lots of places to hide surveillance equipment. I'd arrived early and chosen a booth with a clear view of the entrance and good acoustics for the recording device I'd hidden under the table. Lisa Patterson was sitting at the bar, nursing a beer and pretending to watch the baseball game on TV. Agent Chen and her team were positioned around the room, looking like ordinary customers having ordinary drinks. Everything was in place. Susan walked in at exactly 9 o'clock, looking around the bar with the nervous energy of someone who knew she was walking into a trap but couldn't figure out what kind. She was wearing a black dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month, and she moved through the crowd like she owned the place. She slid into the booth across from me, and I caught that familiar whiff of expensive perfume mixed with desperation. "You look good," I said. "Prison Orange is going to be a real step down." "Very funny. Have you made your decision?" "I have, but first I want to hear the whole story. From the beginning. How long have you been sleeping with Mike Patterson?" Susan glanced around the bar, making sure no one was listening. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. 20 years of marriage, Susan. I think I deserve to know when it all went wrong." She sighed and took a sip of the wine I'd ordered for her. 18 months. It started as a business relationship, then became something more. What kind of business relationship? Mike needed help laundering money through real estate transactions. I had the connections and the expertise to make it happen. So you were criminals first, lovers second? We were partners, in every sense of the word. Partners who stole $12 million from investors. Partners who got creative when the economy tanked and the project went south. We were trying to save the development, Jack. We were trying to protect people's investments. By stealing them? Susan's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw a flash of the calculating criminal underneath the suburban housewife facade. By doing what we had to do to survive. The booth creaked as someone slid in next to Susan. Mike Patterson, right on schedule. He was wearing an expensive suit and a nervous smile, like a man who knew he was walking into a lion's den, but couldn't resist the chance to gloat. "Jack," he said, extending his hand. "Good to finally meet you properly." I ignored the handshake. "Mike, how's the money laundering business?" His smile faltered. "I'm sorry?" "The money laundering, the embezzlement, the fraud, the whole criminal enterprise you've been running with my wife, and how's that working out for you?" Mike looked at Susan, who shrugged. "He knows everything about us, about the business, about the Morrison project. The question is what he's going to do about it." "What I'm going to do," I said, "is give you both one last chance to do the right thing. Turn yourselves in, cooperate with the FBI, and maybe you'll get a reduced sentence." Mike laughed, but it sounded forced. "Turn ourselves in for what? Being creative with accounting, having an affair? Those aren't federal crimes, Jack. Money laundering is, embezzlement is, conspiracy to commit fraud is, and breaking into my house with a rifle to steal evidence? That's about 6 different felonies right there. You can't prove any of that." I smiled and pulled out my phone, which had been recording our conversation since the moment they sat down. "Actually, I can. Thanks to you two, I now have recorded confessions to multiple federal crimes." Susan's face went white. "You're wearing a wire. I don't need to wear a wire. You just confessed to money laundering and embezzlement in a room full of FBI agents." Mike looked around the bar with growing panic, finally noticing the serious-looking men and women who were suddenly paying very close attention to our conversation. "This is entrapment," he said. "This is justice," I replied. Agent Chen appeared at our table, flanked by 2 other agents. "Michael Patterson, Susan Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit money laundering, embezzlement, and fraud." The next few minutes were a blur of handcuffs, Miranda rights, and Susan's shocked protests. Other customers in the bar stopped their conversations to watch, as 2 of the most prominent people in our suburban community were led away in chains. Lisa Patterson appeared at my elbow as the FBI agents escorted her husband and my wife toward the exit. "How does it feel?" she asked. I watched Susan turn back to look at me one last time, her face a mask of rage and disbelief. For 20 years, she'd been the center of my world. Now she was just another criminal on her way to federal prison. "It feels like justice," I said. But even as I said it, I knew this was just the beginning. Susan and Mike were going to prison, but there were still loose ends to tie up. Friends who had chosen sides. A community that would need to know the truth. A son who deserved better than the mess his parents had made of their lives. The reckoning was just getting started. The story broke on the local news 3 days later. Prominent local couple arrested in federal money laundering scheme. The reporter, a serious-looking woman in her 30s, stood in front of the Morrison development site and explained how a routine FBI investigation had uncovered a conspiracy involving $12 million in stolen investor funds and connections to organized crime. I watched from my living room, which still smelled faintly of smoke from the fire that had started this whole mess. Ethan sat beside me on the couch, eating cereal and occasionally glancing at the TV screen. Is Mom really going to prison? He asked. Probably. The evidence against her is pretty strong. Good. The simple certainty in his voice broke my heart a little. No kid should have to feel that way about his mother. But Susan had made her choices, and now we all had to live with the consequences. My phone had been ringing nonstop since the arrests. Reporters wanting interviews, neighbors wanting gossip, friends wanting to know if I was okay. I'd stopped answering after the first dozen calls. There would be time for explanations later. Right now, I just wanted to process what had happened and figure out how to move forward. The doorbell rang, and I looked through the peephole to see Detective Ray Sanders standing on my front porch. Sanders was the local cop who'd investigated the fire at my house, a serious man in his 50s who'd made it clear that he didn't entirely believe my story about the accidental fire in my office. "Mr. Morrison," he said when I opened the door, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About the fire in your office. About your wife's arrest. About the fact that you somehow managed to produce evidence that the FBI had been looking for 6 months." I invited him in and offered him coffee, which he declined. Sanders was the kind of cop who took his job seriously and didn't like loose ends. The fact that I'd gone from sufferer of arson to key witness in a federal investigation had clearly raised some red flags. "Let me guess," I said. "You think I set the whole thing up, burned my own office, framed my wife, and somehow convinced the FBI to arrest her on bogus charges. Did you?" "Detective Sanders, my wife and her boyfriend broke into my house at 3 in the morning, sedated me, threatened my son with a rifle, and burned down my office to destroy evidence of their crimes. If I'd wanted to frame them, I could have come up with something a lot more creative than that." Sanders studied my face like he was trying to read my thoughts. "The FBI says you provided crucial evidence in their case, evidence that led directly to the arrests." "I provided evidence that was given to me by Lisa Patterson, Mike's wife. She'd been documenting his criminal activities for months. And you just happened to have the right connections to get that evidence to the right people. I used to work for the CIA. I know how to contact federal law enforcement when I have information about a crime. That's not suspicious. That's civic duty." Sanders wasn't buying it, but he didn't have any evidence to contradict my story. The truth was, everything I'd told him was accurate, if not complete. I had provided crucial evidence to the FBI. Lisa Patterson had given me that evidence. And Susan and Mike had committed the crimes they'd been arrested for. The fact that I'd orchestrated their downfall through a carefully planned trap wasn't illegal. It was just good strategy. "Your wife's lawyer is claiming that you set her up," Sanders said. "That you manipulated the situation to make her look guilty of crimes she didn't commit." "My wife's lawyer is being paid to say whatever Susan tells him to say. The evidence speaks for itself." "Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a man with CIA training and a grudge against his cheating wife managed to destroy her life in less than a week." I looked at Sanders for a long moment, trying to decide how much truth he could handle. "Detective, let me ask you a question. If your wife was having an affair, and you found out she was also stealing money and laundering it for the mob, what would you do?" "I'd call the police. I did call the police. I called the FBI. I gave them evidence of federal crimes. They investigated and made arrests based on that evidence. That's how the system is supposed to work." Sanders stood up, clearly frustrated that he couldn't poke holes in my story. "This isn't over, Morrison. If I find out you broke any laws in your little revenge scheme, I'll arrest you myself." "I'm sure you will, Detective. But you won't find anything because I didn't break any laws. I just helped law enforcement do their job." After Sanders left, I sat in my living room and thought about what he'd said. He was right, of course. I had orchestrated Susan and Mike's downfall. I had manipulated the situation to ensure they would be caught and prosecuted for their crimes. But I hadn't broken any laws. I hadn't planted evidence or lied to investigators or committed any crimes of my own. I'd simply used my skills and connections to make sure that justice was served. The fact that I'd enjoyed every minute of it was beside the point. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You think you've won, but this isn't over. You destroyed my life, and I'm going to destroy yours. Watch your back." "Susan," I showed the message to Ethan, who read it with the same expression he'd worn while watching the news report. "Is she threatening us?" "She's threatening me, but she's in federal custody, so there's not much she can do about it." "What if she gets out on bail?" "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." But privately, I was concerned. Susan was facing serious federal charges, but she was also a smart woman with connections and resources. If she made bail, she might decide that revenge was more important than self-preservation. I made a mental note to call Agent Chen and make sure she was aware of Susan's threat. The next few days passed in a blur of media attention and legal proceedings. Susan and Mike were denied bail, deemed flight risks by a federal judge who'd read about their plan to disappear with stolen money. Lisa Patterson was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, and she was making the most of her opportunity to destroy her ex-husband's reputation. The local newspaper ran a series of articles about the case, painting Susan and Mike as the masterminds of a sophisticated criminal conspiracy that had defrauded investors and laundered money for organized crime. The articles mentioned me only as the ex-husband who provided crucial evidence to federal investigators. I was fine with that. I didn't want to be the center of attention. I just wanted Susan and Mike to pay for what they'd done to my family. But the attention found me anyway. My phone rang at 7 in the morning, and I recognized the voice immediately. Karen Walsh, Susan's best friend and the woman who'd been the maid of honor at our wedding 20 years ago. "Jack, we need to talk." "About what, Karen?" "About what you did to Susan, about the lies you told to get her arrested." "I didn't lie about anything. Susan committed federal crimes and she got caught. That's not my fault." Susan told me what really happened, how you set her up, manipulated the evidence, and got her arrested for crimes she didn't commit. Susan told you what she wanted you to believe. The evidence against her is overwhelming. "The evidence you manufactured," I sighed. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. Susan's friends and supporters were going to rally around her, claiming she was the sufferer of an elaborate frame job. They were going to paint me as the villain in this story, the bitter ex-husband who destroyed an innocent woman's life out of spite. Karen, I'm going to say this once, and then I'm going to hang up. Susan was having an affair with Mike Patterson. They were stealing money from investors and laundering it through fake real estate transactions. They broke into my house, threatened my son, and burned down my office to destroy evidence of their crimes. Those are facts, not opinions. And if you don't believe me, wait for the trial. The FBI has enough evidence to convict them both 10 times over. You're lying. I'm done with this conversation. I hung up, but I knew it wouldn't end there. Karen was just the beginning. Soon other friends would call, neighbors would whisper. The community would choose sides. Some would believe the evidence and support me. Others would believe Susan's version of events and paint me as the villain. I was prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for was how much it would hurt. These were people I'd known for years. People who'd been to my house for dinner parties and barbecues. People who'd watched Ethan grow up and celebrated holidays with my family. Now they were going to turn against me, choosing to believe a convicted criminal over the evidence of their own eyes. But that was the price of justice, and it was a price I was willing to pay. My phone buzzed with another text message. This one was from Lisa Patterson. "Turn on Channel 7, you're going to want to see this." I grabbed the remote and switched to the local news, where a breaking news banner was scrolling across the bottom of the screen. New arrests in Morrison development case. The reporter was standing in front of the FBI building, explaining how the investigation had expanded to include 3 additional suspects, including Vincent Caruso, the mob-connected contractor who'd been paying bribes to Mike Patterson. Federal agents arrested Caruso this morning at his home in Arlington, the reporter said. Sources close to the investigation say that evidence provided by cooperating witnesses has revealed a broader conspiracy involving money laundering, bribery, and connections to organized crime. I smiled. The dominoes were falling exactly as I'd hoped. Susan and Mike's arrests had led to bigger fish, and the FBI was rolling up the entire criminal network. Justice wasn't just being served, it was being served with a side of poetic irony. My phone rang again. This time it was Agent Chen. "Mr. Morrison, I wanted to thank you personally. Your evidence has led to the biggest organized crime bust in this district in 5 years. We've arrested 7 people so far, and we're not done yet." "I'm glad I could help." "There's something else. We found evidence that Vincent Caruso had put out a contract on you. He knew you had information that could hurt him, and he was planning to have you eliminated to keep you quiet." My blood ran cold. "When?" "The contract was issued 2 days before your wife's arrest. If we hadn't moved when we did, you might not be alive to have this conversation." I thought about that for a moment. Susan and Mike hadn't just been stealing money. They'd been working with people who eliminated witnesses, people who would have homicided me to protect their criminal enterprise. "Agent Chen, there's something you should know. I received a threatening text message from Susan yesterday. She said she was going to destroy my life." "We'll look into it. But Susan Morrison is going to be in federal prison for the next 20 years. She's not in a position to threaten anyone. I hope you're right. I am right. You did the right thing, Mr. Morrison. You helped us take down a dangerous criminal organization, and you protected your family in the process. You should be proud. After Chen hung up, I sat in my living room and tried to process what she'd told me. I'd been living with a woman who was not only cheating on me and stealing money, but who was also connected to people who homicided witnesses. If I hadn't discovered the truth when I did, I might be dead right now. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it made me angry all over again. Susan hadn't just betrayed our marriage and stolen money from investors. She'd put me and Ethan in mortal danger by getting involved with organized crime. She deserved everything that was coming to her, and I was going to make sure she got it. The federal courthouse in downtown Washington was a monument to justice, all marble columns and soaring ceilings designed to remind everyone who entered that the law was bigger than any individual. I'd been here dozens of times over the past 6 months for hearings and depositions and meetings with prosecutors. Today was different. Today was the sentencing. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, watching as Susan and Mike were led into the courtroom in orange jumpsuits and shackles. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by 6 months in federal custody. The expensive clothes and confident swagger were gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of people who'd finally realized that their actions had consequences. Susan turned to look at me once, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been regret. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Judge Patricia Williams was a stern woman in her 60s who'd spent 30 years on the federal bench and had a reputation for tough sentences. She'd presided over the entire case, from the initial arraignment through the lengthy plea negotiations that had ultimately failed when Susan and Mike refused to accept responsibility for their crimes. "The defendants will rise," she said. Susan and Mike stood, flanked by their lawyers. They'd hired the best legal representation money could buy, but even the most expensive lawyers couldn't overcome the mountain of evidence that the FBI had assembled against them. Bank records, recorded phone conversations, photographs, testimony from cooperating witnesses. The case had been so solid that the defense had eventually stopped trying to prove innocence and focused instead on mitigating factors. "Mr. Patterson," Judge Williams said, "you have been convicted of conspiracy to commit money laundering, embezzlement, fraud, and racketeering. These are serious crimes that have caused significant harm to dozens of sufferers and undermined public trust in our financial institutions." Mike's lawyer stepped forward. "Your Honor, my client accepts responsibility for his actions and deeply regrets the harm he has caused. He asks for the court's mercy and leniency in sentencing." Judge Williams looked at Mike with the expression of someone who'd heard that speech 1,000 times before. "Mr. Patterson, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Mike cleared his throat and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Your Honor, I made terrible mistakes that hurt a lot of people. I'm sorry for what I did, and I'm ready to accept the consequences." "Mr. Patterson, you stole $12 million from investors who trusted you with their life savings. You laundered money for organized crime figures who use violence to intimidate witnesses and sufferers. You showed a complete disregard for the law and for the welfare of others. The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release." Mike's legs buckled, and his lawyer had to steady him. 25 years. He'd be in his 60s when he got out, assuming he lived that long. Federal prison wasn't kind to white-collar criminals who'd worked with the mob. "Mrs. Morrison," Judge Williams continued, "you have been convicted of the same charges as Mr. Patterson, plus additional counts of conspiracy and obstruction of justice for your role in destroying evidence and threatening witnesses." Susan's lawyer, an expensive-suited woman who'd spent the past 6 months arguing that her client was a sufferer of an abusive marriage, stepped forward with the same speech about accepting responsibility and asking for mercy. But Judge Williams wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Morrison, the evidence presented at trial shows that you are not a sufferer in this case, but an active participant in a sophisticated criminal conspiracy. You used your position as a real estate professional to facilitate money laundering operations. You participated in the theft of millions of dollars from innocent investors. And when your crimes were discovered, you broke into your own home, threatened your own child with a weapon, and destroyed evidence to cover up your criminal activities." Susan stood perfectly still, but I could see her hands shaking. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, the court has reviewed evidence that you attempted to frame your ex-husband for domestic misuse in order to discredit him as a witness against you. This represents a particularly callous disregard for both the truth and the welfare of your own family. Your Honor, Susan's lawyer interjected, my client was under tremendous emotional stress. Your client was a criminal who got caught, Judge Williams said sharply. Mrs. Morrison, the court sentences you to 30 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will also pay restitution in the amount of $12 million to the sufferers of your crimes. 30 years. Susan would be nearly 70 when she got out, if she got out. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to see Ethan, now 15 and taller than me, sitting beside me in the gallery. He'd asked to come to the sentencing, and I'd finally agreed. He deserved to see justice done. How do you feel? He whispered. I thought about it. How did I feel? Vindicated? Satisfied? Relieved? I feel like it's over, I said. But it wasn't over. Not quite yet. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse with Ethan and found Lisa Patterson waiting for us on the steps. She looked different than she had 6 months ago, stronger, more confident. The divorce settlement had been generous, and she'd used Mike's criminal conviction to claim most of their assets. How does it feel to win? She asked. It doesn't feel like winning, I said. It feels like surviving. That's the same thing sometimes. She was right. For the past year, I'd been fighting for my life, my family, and my future. I'd been up against people who were willing to eliminate to protect their secrets. I'd survived and they hadn't. That was a kind of victory. What happens now? Ethan asked. Now we go home, I said. We rebuild. We move forward. What about Mom? I looked back at the courthouse, where Susan was being led away in shackles to begin her 30-year sentence. Your mom made her choices, I said. Now she has to live with them. We walked to the parking garage in silence. 3 survivors of a war that had started in a suburban bedroom and ended in a federal courtroom. The sun was setting over the Washington skyline, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. It had been exactly 1 year since that 3 a.m. phone call from my father had started this whole nightmare. 1 year since I'd discovered that my wife was a criminal and my marriage was a lie. Now it was over. Susan and Mike were going to spend the rest of their lives in prison. The criminal organization they'd worked for had been dismantled. The stolen money had been recovered and returned to the sufferers. Justice had been served. As we drove home through the familiar streets of our suburban neighborhood, I thought about what came next. Ethan would graduate from high school in 2 years and go to college. I'd continue running my cybersecurity business, maybe take on some consulting work with the FBI. We'd build a new life from the wreckage of the old one. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Congratulations. You did the right thing. Dad, I smiled. My father, the retired CIA operative who'd started this whole thing with a 3 a.m. phone call, had been watching from the shadows as his son took down a criminal conspiracy. He was proud of me. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of myself too. Dad, Ethan said, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think Mom ever really loved us? It was a hard question, the kind that didn't have easy answers. I thought about the woman I'd married 20 years ago, the woman who'd laughed at my jokes and held my hand during movies and cried when Ethan took his first steps. Had that woman been real? Or had it all been an act? A long con designed to give Susan cover for her criminal activities? I didn't know. I might never know. I think she loved us as much as she was capable of loving anyone, I said finally. But some people aren't capable of very much love. Some people only love themselves. Ethan nodded like that made sense. At 15, he was old enough to understand that the world was complicated and that people weren't always what they seemed to be. We pulled into our driveway, and I looked at the house that had been the scene of so much drama and betrayal. The office had been rebuilt, the locks had been changed, and the security system had been upgraded. It was home again. As we walked up the front steps, I thought about Detective Sanders, who'd been convinced that I'd manipulated the whole situation to frame my wife. He'd been right in a way. I had manipulated the situation, but I hadn't framed anyone. I'd simply made sure that criminals faced justice for their crimes. That wasn't manipulation. That was righteousness. Inside the house, Ethan went upstairs to do homework, and I poured myself a glass of bourbon. The good stuff, not the cheap whiskey I'd been drinking during the dark days of the investigation. I sat in my rebuilt office, surrounded by new furniture and new equipment, and thought about the past year. It had been the worst year of my life and the best year of my life, sometimes simultaneously. I'd lost my wife, my marriage, and most of my friends, but I'd gained something more valuable. The knowledge that I could fight back when someone tried to destroy me, that I could win when the odds were stacked against me, that I was stronger than I'd thought. My computer chimed with an email notification. Agent Chen sending me an update on the ongoing investigation into Vincent Crusoe's criminal organization. Jack, thought you'd want to know that Crusoe pled guilty today and agreed to cooperate with federal investigators. His testimony is going to help us take down 3 more criminal organizations. Your evidence started a chain reaction that's going to put dozens of criminals behind bars. Thank you for having the courage to do the right thing, Sarah. I smiled and closed the email. It was over. Really, truly over. Susan and Mike were in prison. The criminals they'd worked for were facing justice. The stolen money had been returned to its rightful owners. And I was free. Free to rebuild my life. Free to raise my son without the shadow of criminal conspiracy hanging over our heads. Free to move forward without looking over my shoulder. I raised my glass of bourbon in a toast to the empty office. To justice, I said, and to the people who are brave enough to fight for it. Outside, the sun finished setting and the suburban neighborhood settled into its evening routine. Families having dinner, kids doing homework, couples watching TV together. Normal life. The kind of life I'd thought I had before I discovered the truth about my wife. Now I really did have it, and it felt like victory.